The Gluttony set was based on actual police crime scene photos, which had to do with a real case of suicide. And the quality of that actual crime scene is what I try to achieve here in this studio set that we built as if the room had been partitioned and extended and remodeled over and over again by a whole procession of occupants previously, so that you got a sense of layering and that the age that had built up in terms of the thickness of paint and the accumulation of grease visually reflected the amount of prehistory and perhaps suggested that there may have been other crimes or events taking place here. It had a kind of a thickness of foreboding that you could read from the caking of the grease on the windows. It was just the neglect and the obsession of the character that you found who occupied these spaces that was just written on the walls. For the Greed murder scene, we made it an elegant office, and an elegant office is not a lot, you can do with the atmosphere of it. I mean, I could talk about what interested me in the design of that was the articulation of the ceiling beams and the finishes of the wood veneer and the detail of the doors. But it's not very powerful compared to a lot of the other design elements. What was interesting was, recreating the composite of that set with the approach from the side door and the back spaces rather than the normal kind of front door entry where you're coming in. And that was really David's idea. That's how he wanted to shoot it, and to accommodate that kind of rear entry. We ended up deciding to build it because we could never find anything that had that physical layout in an existing location. Well, you have in the police station and the library a reflection of the municipal control, the authorities, the established order. It participates also in design elements that have to do with period films, film noirs, particularly in the police station. And we wanted to give them a sense of the precedent of everything that went before in the life of this city. It's a city of, it has a kind of history to it, whereas all the murder scenes and the crime scenes were driven, the design of them was driven by the characters themselves, and they're trying to represent their sins visually in those rooms. There was a big fight with the studio to pay for all that construction. I just said, why don't you just go to an existing location library, like at UCLA or Beverly Hills Library. But they're all very modern and very bright, and you couldn't control them as easily, and they just didn't have the atmosphere. It just wouldn't work anywhere else. It's like, how could you possibly think about doing it somewhere else? Except maybe the New York Public Library in Manhattan, which I kept pushing for. As I thought, well, they'd be so happy not to have to go to New York to do it. They'd be thrilled just to build it here. In certain cases, the rooms were used as offices, but we were using them as residences. And I think the confusion of that helps to kind of also wrong foot the viewer to the point where you don't really know where you are, and the danger that you sense from the SWAT team not knowing what's through the next door is amplified because it's not a typical place to live. You're not really sure what kind of a place this is because you're seeing the kind of light fixtures and accessories you associate with office building, but the furniture is residential and domestic. So you're not quite sure what's going on here. what we're saying is that this is an abandoned office building that's occupied by crackheads, and they live there, but you don't know that that's what's happening until you get further. I think the design of the interiors is always tailored to the victims, and that the people inhabiting the spaces are placed according to their position in the world we're living in, their place in society. I don't think everyone lives equally. It's a diverse society, and that's part of the problem. There's the haves and the have-nots. The Red Cross idea came from a search for trying to illuminate the environment of John Doe's apartment using a mixture of all kinds of different light sources. I decided that because we couldn't use daylight, I would use every other kind of source I could find. And so if you look, there are fluorescents, there are incandescents, there are neons. So it just became logical to have a neon, and when I considered, what the neon should be, it just seemed to me that a man like him should have a neon cross. Well, the approach to the interiors is very cave-like, and as you move through it, you feel like you're descending into a basement world, particularly since we painted all the windows black. There's daylight outside, but we've closed it off, so you're now subterranean. The only light that exists is either artificial, a red neon cross, or a fluorescent tube. But there are also scratchings on the windows of various obsessive symbols of various kinds, of graffiti, John Doe's graffiti, that leak little chinks of light into an otherwise a dark, lightless world, a world with only darkness. We try to achieve in Lust the seediest, most indulgent, corrupt environment we could possibly muster, the lowest of the low. It involved working in an existing nightclub basement and adding wall partitions and creating a kind of another labyrinth. The approach to the palette of these scenes is to keep color out of it as much as possible, so that the red of the bloodstain reads as really the only color element in an otherwise sepia-toned world. Spoon-feeding the audience enough to keep their attention, letting the story flow from room to room, from clue to clue, and giving you those hints. You're on the trail with the detectives. We try to give that flavor of the importance of the common object. Some are more important than others, and some are more featured than others, but they all tend to communicate something, and they're thought about. Even the smallest detail, there's an idea to it, and a logic to it, and the world is constructed around that idea.
I am Melody McDaniel. I was responsible for doing John Doe's photography for the movie Seven. Besides taking the pictures, I was responsible for making the pictures kind of slightly off or imperfected. And I was even asked in other departments, in the art department, they were impressed with the way I was bleaching out my Polaroids, scratching on the negatives, stepping on them, and doing whatever just to make it look just to give it some texture. For the gluttony photographs, I brought this old land camera in because I was imagining that John Doe was somewhat of an amateur photographer, so I visualized him just sort of going into a thrift store, a secondhand store, and buying a cheap camera that is like an old-fashioned camera and just kind of making it work. I brought in my land camera that has like a lot of light leaks in it, holes in it, so it's not perfect. So with the gluttony pictures, I went in and made things a little bit more abstract. That's what I wanted. I knew that I wanted them to look different than the crime scene type of photography, which is very Ouija-esque, flash, hard flash, very contrasty, where my pictures, I wanted them to feel a little blurry. I wanted them to see a little scratchy and have like imperfections on them, and being through that kind of camera, which was an old land camera, would help me give that effect, like even the lens being a little slightly soft. So nothing was really sharp. Some things were one part of the frame would be in focus and the other part would, half wouldn't. And I thought that might be an interesting way for John Doe to take his photographs. I use a lot of natural light. I'm untechnical. I don't use a lot of technical techniques to make my work, my images happen. I tend to just do a lot of guessing, and things just happen, and I get a lot of interesting mistakes that'll come up that I may not be able to recreate, but sometimes it works for the advantage and sometimes not. This particular film I was using is called 665 Polaroid film, and it's black and white, and it comes with a negative, which is the only, I think, Polaroid film that comes with a negative. So it lets you alter it. The Polaroid film comes with a coater. If you don't coat the picture, it'll fade. It'll start to fade. So instead of coating them immediately, I just let them sit, and I let them kind of, even if I had my photo assistants take them outside of the studio and bake them in the sun, so they started bleaching out. And then I even sometimes would take that after bleaching them, I'd pick up the photograph, stick it back onto the negative, and so to create this weird texture. I just was very messy with them. So it was very interesting. And David, I went and presented this to David just to make sure I was like not, I was on the right track. If this was something interesting to him, and he loved it. He goes, even push it more, make them more distorted, make it so like even if you barely even have an image on one of the Polaroids. So I gave him a variety of that, and I noticed that with the gluttony, I focused on my Polaroid camera, and also I did use a 4x5 land camera because I used, again, they had a Type 55 film for the 4x5 camera, which I can do the same thing with the Polaroid. Just visually, for some reason, I just thought it was just a feeling I got, and I wanted, being that I also, as a photographer, I use like 3 or 4 different cameras depending on the type of story I'm about to reveal. I think each camera can tell a story. Sometimes one, just it's a feeling I got. And for gluttony, I just thought Polaroid land camera was perfect, and also a 4x5 land camera. Now for greed, 35 millimeter. That was it. And what I did was in the printing, in order to make the 35 feel a little bit, to show a lot of imperfections on that, I definitely had to tweak it in the printing. And instead of spotting the prints, there was a lot of dust in the darkroom, and I just kind of let it go. I just let it happen, just so it didn't look so perfect and clean. Because John Doe didn't strike me as even though he seemed like an intelligent guy, I didn't feel that he would want to go back and spot his prints to make sure it was perfect. Again, not being experienced, I kind of walked in feeling a little, I shouldn't say a lot unsure of what I was going to do, but I just went with what I thought would be the best. And I started to set up as I had to pretend like I had to kind of get into John Doe's head, as if like, what are the steps he would take to get through to this, the lawyer I think I was supposed to kill through with the camera. With the greed photographs, I was working with the actor, David. In this case, again, it was very vague. He kind of didn't give me too much information. He wanted me to go in there and just sort of make things happen, however I saw it. I just think it's just interesting when you have your photographs are telling a story, but they happen to be on a piece of paper as you're turning the page, or, I actually saw a book that was called A Paper Story, and I thought, or A Paper Movie. And I thought that was just so beautifully put for somebody who likes to tell stories with their photography, and it's almost so close to showing a film, showing your movie, showing your pictures in a cinematic way, but it's still, not really moving, or it's moving at the pace you want it to move when you're turning the page. I don't know if that makes any sense. I was first a fly on the wall spying on him, so I had a Nikon 35 millimeter camera with a wide lens, just so it felt like I was kind of distant. And then I started with a wide lens, so I was kind of far away. And then as I wanted to get closer to him, I switched lenses, like a 50 and then 85 to 105. And as those lenses changed, I was getting more and closer to killing him. Sorry, I was going to say the victim. And I remember just being so excited because I actually particularly like to take pictures of dark things, and when I say dark, not just like literally the color, dark like that. I just like things that are just unusual or not common, or things that like objects and also people that are just outcasts of society, I guess, in that sense. For some reason, I'm attracted to that. I noticed that I like telling stories with photographs, and I think it's also a way of eventually wanting to move into filmmaking and moving pictures. Gluttony was extremely abstract. Greed was more of a narrative. And with lust, it was a combination of both, where I was trying to make a little narrative by interchanging lenses to get closer to her. And also, I wanted things to feel a little dreamy and abstract, so I shot things out of focus. Composition and the cropping was just way off, just so it looked spontaneous and just crazed for some reason. I just imagined John Doe just running around trying to keep up with her and without revealing himself. So I turned the lust into more like a narrative along with a visual abstract with the photography. I work with assistants, sometimes a couple, sometimes in the case with Se7en, I had 3 assistants, and they helped me with the process by manipulating the photographs, the Polaroids, and also the exposure, helping me scratch the negatives. They would take the film outside and step on it. They'd even open up the camera backs to let light in to give an effect of very amateur photography. And so within my process, it's really helpful to have a team of people to help my art. And my team was Cecil Cole, Eric Coleman, and Greg Scafidi.
All these photographs, I had no idea what I was up for until I actually looked at the real thing, what the police department actually had. They're pretty gritty, very, very contrasty black and white pictures.